Good afternoon, and welcome to a World Leaders Forum event co-sponsored with the School of International and Public Affairs. I want to thank Dean John Coatsworth and his faculty for their ongoing contributions to this particular forum, but also to the World Leaders Forum in general. We are joined here today by the President of Turkey, President Gül, and by First Lady Gül. Mr. President and Mrs. Gül, welcome to Columbia. I want to welcome as well all the members of the Turkish delegation traveling with the President who are here with us, including several ambassadors and deputies from Turkey's parliament. 2 years ago, Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan came to Columbia to address this forum, and we welcome this opportunity to continue a dialogue with a very significant nation. We launched the World Leaders Forum in 2003 as a university-wide initiative to support serious dialogue on the most pressing economic, political, environmental, and social questions of the time, questions that with each passing year seem to have larger and larger global dimensions. Over the past 7 years, the Forum has offered an opportunity for more than 15,000 students, faculty, and staff to directly engage with important figures from 48 nations representing every corner of the world. The role of universities in creating a space for uninhibited and critical discussion of controversial issues is fundamental to a democratic society. This is all the more true when other forums in the society seem less and less capable of having difficult conversations. Today's address from President Gül marks the final event in a week of World Leaders Forum events on the campus coinciding with the fall meeting of the UN General Assembly. And we have heard from a broad and diverse group of leaders from Africa, Europe, and Asia. They have challenged us with our views, and I think it's fair to say certainly Columbia students have challenged them, which is just as it should be. For many decades, Americans have viewed the nation of Turkey as a metaphorical bridge linking the West and the Muslim world, a rather obvious and inescapable viewpoint born principally of Turkey's geography and location. Many Turkish people, it must be said, however, prefer to think of their home not as a connective thread, but as a center in and of itself, a view that in many respects has proved to be the more accurate. Today, Turkey is defined not so much by geography, but by a host of cross-cutting tensions, many of them with historic dimensions and global implications, and many that are now being addressed through Turkey's political system. At times, that process has been passionate, inconclusive, bruising, and dramatic, but that is no different from the way democracies around the globe routinely struggle with issues of consequence. President Gül helped found the Justice and Development Party, known as AKP, in 2001, and was elected President of Turkey in August of 2007. Today, he leads the nation with the fastest-growing economy in Europe. Less than 2 weeks ago, a referendum supported by his government was approved by 58% of Turkish voters. It mandated the adoption of a package of constitutional reforms affecting the operation of the judiciary, the prerogatives of the military, privacy rights and the rights of women, children, the elderly, and the disabled. The vote in Turkey was closely observed and has generated a myriad of opinions and critiques. The issues Turkey is grappling with are emblematic of many of the most urgent concerns facing countries around the globe at this moment in history, such as the intersection of economic development and geopolitics, the clash of conservative and secular cultural values, often revealed in the political realm as a competition between rural populations and urban elites, the interconnectedness of democratic reforms, human rights, an independent judiciary, and a well-functioning free press, the alignment between government policy and commercial interests, and the challenge of preserving sovereignty in a global society that must increasingly rely upon regional and international governing bodies. The address the President will deliver is titled, "What Next? Turkey's Vision, Global Vision for a Prosperous Future." The question of what is next in Turkey is, to say the least, of great interest to all of us here today and to people throughout the world. Please welcome the President of Turkey, President Gül.
Mr. President, dear students, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to be here at Columbia University today. I greet you all, professors, as well as students and guests, and thank those who made this occasion possible for me. This morning, before coming here, I gave a speech at the Council on Foreign Relations on Turkish-American relations. Here at Columbia, I will rather talk about my country, the progress we accomplished in recent years in Turkey first, and then talk about our global vision for a prosperous future. Then I will be answering all of your questions, whatever you wish. Every time I come to New York, I reserve part of my busy schedule to visit bookshops. Not only do I update myself with the latest titles, I also find the opportunity to have an idea about the current issues discussed. This time, visiting the bookshops, one of the books that caught my attention was that of Professor Bollinger, you, sir. Uninhibited, robust, and wide open, a free press for a new century. I have very excited gone through the chapters. I didn't have time to read all. I have to admit this here. As the examples he gave from different court cases were of concern to any political leader striving to analyze the limits of freedom of speech. I agree with Professor Bollinger when he says that the threat to a free press comes not from financial difficulties, but rather from the national and international barriers to gathering and reporting the news. I agree with him, and this is why Turkey's last decade, in which I have been a part of the political leadership, has seen an incredible opening and liberalization for freedom of speech. Despite many difficulties, and despite some segments of our society still skeptical about it, Turkey has taken huge steps for securing freedom of speech. The things that were a taboo 5 years ago are loudly spoken today. Yet, I'm not sure whether this change is perceived fully out of Turkey. The most solid example of this trend in the Turkish media environment was what I should call the heterogenization of media ownership. Not too long ago, the Turkish media world consisted of a couple of media tycoons, which led to a rather monopolistic power in shaping the agenda. Today, there are so many groups, each with their agenda and strength. Today, there's a very rich and colorful media scene in Turkey. There are more than 40 national TV channels, hundreds of local ones, and majority of these channels broadcast to the whole world via satellite. The total daily circulation of national papers reached 4.5 million copies. But considering our nation's media literacy habits, we know that a newspaper copy is read at least by 6 people. There are hundreds of radio channels, national and local. Internet infrastructure and usage is breaking records. Turkey is the country with the highest number of Facebook users after English-speaking countries. My Twitter account is continuously being followed, discussed, retweeted. Many times, Twitter is a more direct source of knowledge for me than the reports I read. Yes, we do have some problems on internet. Some global sites, however, few in number, are unreachable in Turkey. A couple of days ago, this was asked in an interview at the CNN here in New York. I have told them what I will tell you now. This is not something about censorship. This is rather as a result of inadequacy of a tax law. And I have been urging the government and parliament to update these laws as soon as possible. As always, theory follows practice, not vice versa, and Turkey will not be late to update its laws. A very recent example is a clear proof of the fact that Turkey is acting fast in this respect. Not far ago, one would face investigation and trials. Should be even mentioned about the freedom to speak different spoken languages, one of which is Kurdish. Let him broadcast in Kurdish. Today, other than many private Kurdish language channels broadcasting, TRT, our state television, has a Kurdish broadcasting channels around the clock. Aside the Arabic and Turkic language TRT channels. Today, we can talk about any issue, discuss about any theme in Turkey without any limitation and borders. As a result of a 2-century-long evolving progress for pluralism and democracy, Turkey now stands as a country where problems are openly discussed and debated, where civil society thrives, and where freedoms, human rights, and the rule of law prevail above all. Yet, coming to this point has not been easy. We paid dues. Each and every segment of Turkish society has gone through hard times. We had to question our standing, our past, our actions. We have to understand that in the way for more liberties, in the road for more freedom, we are all together, notwithstanding our ethnic, religious, daily differences. These examples and many others can be raised as proofs of Turkey's quest for more democracy, more freedoms, more rule of law. Yet, a recent development which took place only a couple of weeks ago was the most pleasant and the most important. On the 13th of September 2010, 30 years after the military coup that created a tragic result for our democracy, Turkish nation has accepted important constitutional amendments. The proposal of a comprehensive constitutional amendment package has been approved by the Turkish nation by a majority of 58% in a referendum where 77% of the constituencies voted. These amendments, which were praised by many, from intellectuals to EU commissioners, from lawyers to world leaders, are trying, among many other things, to realize the following steps: extending the borders of personal freedoms, overhauling the election methods of the judiciary, redefining the relationship between civilian and military institutions, increasing the number of democratic tools citizens can use, and of course, raising the level of democratic participation. Now, I'm pleased to see that after this referendum, there is a growing consensus for a new constitution among the political parties. Today, speaking at Columbia University, one of the cradles of liberal thought in the world, I'm proud to be the president of a country that is continuously working for a more democratic nation. As the president of Turkey, I know that we still have a long way to go. I know that we have to raise the standards of our democracy. We have to broaden its scope. We have to enhance means of participation. Our task is certainly not over. Turkey aspires to become a world-class democracy and to benefit from the growing prosperity stemming from a competitive and knowledge-based economy. I tell you this as I am aware that each steps we make to these ends, the problems of today will be solved one after another. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the end of Cold War marked a new international strategy environment in which there is an abundance of pressing issues such as terrorism, extremism, energy and food security, natural disasters, epidemics, frozen or active conflicts, and rebuilding distressed countries. There is also a growing recognition that finding solutions to seemingly less tangible issues like global warming, poverty, reforming the global financial architecture, and preventing cultural polarization is becoming increasingly urgent. With the emergence of new and unforeseen challenges, the international system is bound to evolve towards a new state of equilibrium in the next decade. In this new global setting, Turkey continues to be a constructive actor in its region and to make positive contribution to the establishment of a viable new international system. Turkey has been playing a crucial role in its multidimensional region that extends to the Balkans, the East Mediterranean, the Caucasus, and the Middle East and beyond. This unique geopolitical position has created both challenges and opportunities for Turkey. In addressing the challenges and risks and seizing the opportunities, Turkey harbors various assets, of which the most important is its dynamic and aspiring population. Our most important objective is to provide the nation with the highest political, economic, and social standards. The achievement of this objective will be highly facilitated if stability and peace prevail in our neighboring regions. A stronger commitment to upholding human rights and democracy is also central to our common quest for peace, development, and social justice in our region. We should not forget that protection and promotion of human rights are a major element of the resolution of today's security challenges. Respect for human rights can help prevent conflicts, contribute to a sustainable development, and also support poverty reduction strategies. Adherence to the rule of law and good governance is a prerequisite for consolidation of stability and progress across the globe. Therefore, Turkey attaches great importance to the promotion and protection of human rights as a priority area in its national and foreign policy agenda. That's why I have started my speech with giving examples from our latest accomplishments. The challenges of globalization are best addressed by democratic societies. This is also the message we are spreading across. The credibility of our message is strengthened by the fact that we have historical and cultural ties with many nations in our neighborhood, searching for ways to overcome deep-rooted political, economic, or security problems. The Armenian opening is a very good example. As you will remember, I have gone to Yerevan to watch the football game between Armenia and Turkey. That game was a milestone that looked not to the past, but to the future. And I want to keep my hope that the milestone we have accomplished with Mr. Sarkisyan will be taken further. Hence, Turkey can draw upon its cross-cultural skills in acting as an interface that facilitates dialogue among parties in dispute and promotes harmony across different cultures. Today, the Turkish influence is being felt in the most positive manner, not in the neighborhood countries, but in a global scale. Turkey's actions are being followed carefully. The last week that we spent here in New York is a clear proof of this. Turkey is a source of inspiration. Distinguished guests, Turkish nation is old in history, but young in demographics. Our young, dynamic, and resourceful population of 72 million with a moderate rate of growth gives Turkey a competitive advantage in our development efforts. In other words, Turkey's demographics are an asset for itself and its partners, including the European Union. The structural reform process in the economy has been successful. The Turkish economy has become more resilient to measure external or internal shocks, waves, since 2002. It has managed to stay on course in spite of the world economic crisis. Key factors in achieving this favorable outcome were confidence, stability, and predictability. Just to give a few examples, excluding 2009, the year of global crisis, the Turkish economy has grown at an annual average rate of 7.5% during the past 7 years. As a result, Turkey has become the 16th largest economy in the world with a GDP fast approaching the $1 trillion mark. In the first half of 2010, Turkey scored the fastest growth rate among the OECD economies by 11%. Total trade volume has reached $243 billion. We are destined to reach $500 billion threshold in the coming few years. Foreign direct investment, FDI, to Turkey reached a total of $69 billion during the last 5 years. Even in 2009, the year of crisis, we received an FDI of $8.5 billion. The FDI in the first half of 2010 was more than $3 billion. Turkey became a country which supplies secure energy to Europe. We have accomplished this by diversifying routes from different sources with new pipelines, part of them already functioning, part of them planned. Tourism is booming. 28 million tourists visited Turkey in 2009, placing us among the top 10 tourist destinations in the world. Turkey was the only country which increased the number of tourists arriving during 2009, the year of crisis. All these figures and indicators are records in themselves which could not have even been imagined before. Turkey is also making itself known in the world through a renaissance in literature, art, sports, education, and science. It's now very likely that you will see a Turkish writer's book on bestsellers list in any of the bookshops in New York. The same is valid for Turkish artists' work, which can be seen in art galleries at Soho. The Turkish movies are both at Venice as well as at Sundance. The Turkish intellectuals' life is in a continuous progress. Our Nobel laureate, writer Orhan Pamuk, has been in Columbia in the past years for lectures. And I remind you, it was Turkey who played the final game with the US, the last basketball world championship in Istanbul. Distinguished guests, Turkey is a strong NATO ally, a negotiating candidate to the European Union, a member of the Organization of the Islamic Conference, and the Black Sea Economic Cooperation Organization, current chair of the Conference on Interaction and Confidence-Building Measures in Asia, observers in the Arab League, strategic partner of the African Union, and thanks to other organizations that we are affiliated with, Turkey is a network and connected power. And of course, Turkey is the current chair of United Nations Security Council, which I presided yesterday in the summit session. I would like also to mention the Alliance of Civilizations launched by Turkey and Spain 5 years ago. The alliance has become the second largest international platform after the UN itself. All our current efforts are aimed at building a stronger Turkey that's able to make its distinctive contribution.
Bütün çabamız bizim daha güçlü bir Türkiye kurmak için. İnanıyorum ki daha önceki hedeflerimiz yerel yapılanma ile daha da güçlenecek. O halde bölgesel anlamda zaten şu anda geleceği yapılandırmada Türkiye çok önemli bir rol oynuyor. Birçok imzalamış olduğumuz enerji, transportasyon ve iletişim anlaşmasıyla biz bir stabilite kurmaya başladık. Bütün Türkiye'yi kapsıyor bu imzaladığımız anlaşmalar. Fakat şu anda değişik bölgesel
issues alone. We strive to usher in a better global economic structure through our participation in the G20, while being no less diligent about issues like curbing global warming, combating terrorism and other forms of cross-border criminal activity, ensuring sustainable energy supplies and eradicating poverty. Furthermore, we are keenly extending a helping hand to underdeveloped states struggling to overcome chronic problems. Without expecting anything in return, Turkey has evolved into an emerging donor. With the contribution of Turkey-based NGOs, our overall development assistance exceeds $1.5 billion annually. As all this makes clear, we are driven by a desire to make our modest contribution to the global efforts towards the betterment of mankind in all respects. In this regard, I believe our record so far as a responsible non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council also speaks for itself. Ladies and gentlemen, so far I talk about my country and what we achieved regarding democratization, peace building and cooperation, economic successes, as well as regarding Turkish accomplishments in other areas of daily life. Turkey's footprint at the global level is increasing day by day. Turkey is a country whose contributions can make a difference at all levels. Now, let me share with you the kind of vision I have for a better and prosperous future in which Turkey will be an active participant. I always believe that we need to reconsider the fundamentals of political and diplomatic language in order to construct a more prosperous, just, and equal future for the world. It is much needed today, as the drastic changes that took place in the last couple of decades have altered the basic sociological definition and categories. More than anything, the meaning of state is changing. Today, what we have called state is in a position to redefine, reposition, and rebrand itself. And of course, the change is influencing what we understood from international relations so far, altering the main definitions and understandings. The very architecture of global policy is changing. The old balances, alliances, and philosophies are giving way to new ones. Old membership and clubs are losing meaning. That's why there is a continuous talks of countries shifting axis. When the very meaning of the word axis continuously changes, shifting axis becomes a mere polemic. The former dichotomies of East versus West, as well as South versus North, have long lost their applicabilities. So are the categories of first, second, and third world. Revolution of internet and globally available information has dramatically influenced the capabilities of former power brokers. The power of media is more heterogeneous than ever. The most recent example is that of WikiLeaks. In such a setting, Turkey believes that we need to establish a new language for global context. This new language is much needed, as the old one is no cure to the problems we are facing today. Foucault said that it was language that determined the limits of power. Today, for a prosperous future, we need to redefine those limits, and we can do that through changing our language. In the final part of my speech, I will shortly concentrate on this new language, which I will prefer to call the new language of diplomacy. This new language of diplomacy should be established not on confrontation or domination, but rather on coming together and shaping power, sharing power. Furthermore, it should create global platforms where different understandings and ways of doing can come together. This new language should be constructed not on hierarchical symbols, but on qualities and competencies. The former categories, such as first, second, and third word, have to be abandoned. The new language should be multicultural, multidimensional, and heterogeneous. Unlike the former language, which was established on a Eurocentric perspective, this new language must be established on universal values. This new language must be inclusive, not exclusive. The new language must be written on principles and deeds rather than on categories. It must take into consideration the actions rather than subjects of the actions. The new language shall not award winners and punish losers. It shall not prioritize among identities and must understand that identities are plural and subject to change. It's only when we are able to establish the new language should we be able to dream about a more prosperous future. Otherwise, the energy we spend on today's complex issues will be a loss. Ladies and gentlemen, as Turkey, we are ready to enthusiastic about such a process of renewal. We have the energy, resources, and vision to participate in such a process. That's why we continuously and tirelessly talk about a new Turkish foreign policy. No single factor alone makes Turkish foreign policy today, but a multitude of factors. We don't define ourselves with the boundaries of a single region, club, or issue. We strive to be active in the areas where we feel a responsibility as a result of our historical heritage and universal belonging. We aim to be policy makers rather than policy appliers. These three principles come together to make what we call active, constructive foreign policy. What makes me comfortable today, after a week full of meetings and discussions at the UN, is to see that the footprint of this active and constructive foreign policy is appreciated widely. The leaders I have met, the delegations I have received, the meetings I have attended, all confirm one thing. The world today is impatient for the construction of a new international architecture. This architecture is reiterated in my conclusion. This architecture, I reiterate in my conclusion, should be established on this entirely new language. Otherwise, we will continue to live the endless cycle of problems that we are living today. As Turkey, we are determined to work for a better world based on the principles of justice, equality, and freedom. A better world is possible. For this, we need to stand together around a shared vision of future. As a famous song said, together we stand, divided we fall. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The President will now take questions. We have 2 microphones. Please feel free to line up. You have to speak. Please identify yourself. And we have translating machines for those who cannot understand the language in which the question or the answer is given. So please, go ahead.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Good afternoon, Mr. President. My name is Kelsey Campbell. I'm a graduate student at the School of International Public Affairs. Affairs. And consequence of this summer's Gaza flotilla incident was the major breakdown in Turkish-Israeli relations, and a consequence of that was that Turkey pulled out of the bilateral and trilateral maritime exercises in the region. And you had talked of working with your regional partners for transnational threats. So I see this as a vulnerability if we're not practicing coordination for future threats.
Okay. Do we have translation or should I speak in Turkish, in English?
We can do it either way. You want to speak whichever way you want, Mr. President.
Ha? Var mı tercüme? Sonra Türkçe konuşuyor. Tamam. Sorunuzu dinleyince tabii
Of course, when I listen to your question, it's very logical what you ask. But let me also say that we should also look at the reasons. Or actually, before looking at the reasons, what I'd like to say is that from the point of view of Turkish-Israeli relations, Turkish-Israeli relations, since the question is relevant to that point, Turkish-Israeli relations were very strong up until a couple of months ago. Turkey recognizes Israel, it acknowledges its presence, has been the first country to recognize and acknowledge its presence in the region. And we've had many good relations, long-standing relations with Israel. Over the course of the years, we have many agreements that were signed between Turkey and Israel. And in fact, Turkey has also worked with the Israelis and the Arab countries in order to help contribute to achieving peace. And most recent example of this effort was the role that Turkey played in trying to have almost direct meetings between the Israelis and the Syrians. And there Turkey worked to bring the two sides to a common understanding. But in addition to that, if you look at other areas, economic, political, cultural, and military areas, there's always been relations between Turkey and Israel. But in 2006, when the events took place in Gaza, before the eyes of the whole world, we were shocked by what took place, because up until a few days before that situation arose in Gaza, we were working to create an environment whereby there would be direct talks between the Israelis and the Syrians in order to solve problems existing between the two countries. Prime Minister Olmert at the time was in Turkey a few days before the events in Gaza began in 2006. They were meeting Prime Minister Erdogan, and they were the two delegations, the Syrians and the Israelis, were in two different hotels, and we were shuttling back and forth between the two sides. And as we were trying to finalize those discussions, the events in Gaza took place, and they were broadcast live to the whole world. I was speaking earlier in my speech about the World Basketball Championship. I'm sure you were able to watch it on television live. And in the same way, people could see then how the people in Gaza died and how Gaza was bombed. And everyone, people in the world, in the region, in our country, and everyone watched what happened. And it would not have been possible in a democratic and open society to act after this incident as if nothing happened. So these exercises which you referred to in the question, the cancellation, those were all as a result of all the events that took place, which I have explained. Unfortunately, later on, there were also other developments, undesirable developments, and I'm sure you follow them very closely. I mean, between Turkey and Israel. But let me say that this has not come about as a result of our choice. We weren't the ones who initiated this situation. Or we, for example, the humanitarian aid convoys in the Mediterranean, the flotilla, had ships from different countries. There were people from 33 different countries, and those were all organized by non-governmental organizations, independent from the governments. And they were traveling towards Gaza. They were in international waters in the Mediterranean. They were 80 miles out at sea from the Israeli coast. And of course, when they are attacked, when they're there and the people are killed, one being a Turkish US citizen and the other 8 being Turkish citizens, of course, it would not be possible to ignore these, what has taken place. And I hope that all of these issues can be resolved within international law, because international law binds any UN member state. No country in the world today can say that they find themselves, that they can be beyond the scope of international law. That is not possible. So, yes, there are these problems. These problems, unfortunately, arose rather quickly, and we see some repercussions, as you refer to some of them. But we hope that they will be resolved within the context of international law, so that sustainable peace is achieved in the region, and there can be, once again, cooperation on a broad scale.
Cemil Megani, School of Business. Mr. President, I have a question for you regarding the freedom of press in Turkey, which you mentioned in your speech. I read that the son-in-law of Turkish Prime Minister, Mr. Erdogan, is the CEO of Çalı Conglomerate, which received government funding for entering the barely profitable Turkish media industry. Later, this conglomerate has been very active in government in acquiring government holdings such as energy distribution companies. Do you find this relationship between state banks, government leaders, and media companies ethically recommendable in modern Turkey?
Ben konuşmamda söyledim.
As I've stated in my speech, the Turkish press and its plurality, where all points are referred to, the fact that the son-in-law of the Prime Minister is head of a company is not something that can be banned. I mean, that's not possible. What's important is that when those credits, loans are sought, the conditions, the guarantees have to be fair, and that whether or not sufficient guarantees were presented, you know, what the interest rates are, those are the kinds of things that one has to look at. As far as I know, this is something a lot under discussion. That's why I have also asked questions about this, because, as you say, this is quite debated in Turkey, and that's why I know that the loans were given out at LIBOR plus quite high interest rates, and those loans have to be repaid. And as far as I know, there is no problem with regard to the repayment of the loans. But what's important here is whether or not there's any pressure on the press as far as freedom of expression is concerned, whether or not there's any limitation to the freedom of expression. These are all things that are being discussed in Turkey. The fact that there is debate on these very issues in Turkey goes to show that there is a lot of discussion, some of it very heated and aggressive in the sense that it's very contentious. I don't mean to say that you asked your question in that way, but there is that discussion in that atmosphere in Turkey, which is actually a testament to the presence of freedom of the press. But as I've said in my speech, there are still things to do. I'm not saying that we're perfect, that it's all very good and that there's nothing else to do. There are still things we need to do, and we have to keep working on those, of course.
University, as you know, we have a great tradition of critical debate here and speaking truth to power. And in light of that ethic and following up on the first question, I'd like to ask you the following. If the flotilla, the facts of the flotilla were reversed, and these were ships headed towards separatist Kurds in Turkey, towards Kurdish Turkestan, what would your government have done? Please, before you launch in a polemic about Israel and Palestinian relations, answer the question of what would your government have done if these ships had refused inspection. Thank you, Mr. President.
Teşekkür ederim bu soruyu bu kadar.
Thank you very much for asking this question in this very direct way. But there's one thing that is not correct here. The Kurds are our own citizens. For 1,000 years, we've been coexisting in the same geography. In my delegation here, I don't know who's a Turk, who's a Kurd, or in the ministerial cabinet. If you ask, you will find out perhaps what the ethnic origin of the person is. We're all equal before the law in Turkey as Turkish citizens, but there were many justified complaints because of lack of proper democratic standards. And as I said this myself in my speech in 1980, when there was a military regime in Turkey, it was forbidden to speak in Kurdish. So, from the point of view of lack of democratic standards, there were many complaints, and our Kurdish citizens. There were many problems with regard to, or difficulties that the Kurdish citizens had. But we're parts of the same country. But Israelis and the Palestinians are not the same people. And they are not part of the same people. And allow me to say that there are occupied territories that Israel has occupied. Gaza doesn't belong to Israel. The Palestinian territories do not belong to Israel. Therefore, the struggle there and the struggle here are not one and the same. And now, what's happening in Gaza, the calls for lifting the blockade in Gaza, the appeal for that doesn't come just from Turkey or the NGOs that were on the flotilla. But before that, you had many NGOs from Greece, from Italy, from the UK, President Obama, Hillary Clinton, the United Nations, Russia, the European Union. Everyone has been making calls, appeals for the lifting of the embargo in Gaza. So here we are talking about humanitarian aid, people carrying humanitarian aid. And when we speak about NGOs, these are NGOs which are sensitive to humanitarian issues, because after all, it's all voluntary and people become parts of the NGOs and they make sacrifices from their own person and they take part in this convoy. And as I said, it wasn't just Turkish people. There were people from 30 different countries. So that's one thing. But then if you're talking about fighting against terrorism in your own soil, and I don't mean to speak only to the PKK, that is organized by some Kurdish people. There are also some Marxist-Leninist terrorist organizations or Stalinist organizations that are formed by some Turks in Turkey. Now, everyone can have their own ideology. I have nothing to say to that. A person could be Marxist or something else, but resorting to violence and resorting to terror and to illegal acts is something else. You have to distinguish between the two.
Pullman, and I'm from the School of General Studies. Mr. President, a consistent theme that's come up is cultural differences is in the question before me. As Turkey seeks to become a member of the European Union and continue to play a part in the global economy, what do you believe are the most challenging cultural differences that Turkey will have to face, and how do you believe that they should be faced?
Teşekkür ederim.
Thank you. European Union is a strategic vision for Turkey. Turkey has chosen membership, full membership to the European Union as a strategic goal for itself, and all political parties in Turkey support this goal. Now, as to what is the greatest challenge in way of this aim, I'll be very open with you here in this university atmosphere. I can tell you that the greatest challenge is the lack of vision on the part of the European Union, because Turkey is fulfilling what it needs to do. Turkey has never asked to become a part of the European Union without fulfilling the criteria that is necessary for membership. That has not been our claim. We have to fulfill the criteria of the club. But there are times when some member states of the EU engage in certain political activities to prevent or create obstacles in way of Turkey fulfilling those criteria. I don't mean to say the European Commission, because they are very principled in the way they conduct the technical negotiations. But as far as the member states of the European Union are concerned, we see from time to time that due to some domestic political considerations, they may opt to act in this way. They, because of their domestic considerations, they lack the vision to see the European Union 30, 40, 50 years down the road. So I can say very clearly that in the world today, the EU does not have the vision currently to play the role that it can throw around with the weight that it has. And I say this because I see in our negotiations process that they put forth certain artificial obstacles. Because what is the negotiations process about? It's about raising the standards of the candidate country, which the European Union will monitor, and when the country fulfills all the criteria, is on the same level as EU standards, then the decision to take that country as a member is taken then. So, because there are all these obstacles, one tends to think that perhaps they are concerned that Turkey can fulfill these criteria, and when Turkey does, then perhaps they feel that it will be more difficult to take Turkey as a member. And let me explain what I mean. For example, there are chapters in the EU about education, environment, justice systems, and energy, and many other topics. In all of these chapters, the candidate country changes its laws and legislation so that that country raises its standards to comply with the standards of the EU. And this is all done through what is called the process of negotiation. And so we are facing some unnecessary hurdles in our negotiations process. You asked me what is the greatest challenge in your question. To me, the greatest challenge in our membership to the EU is to deal with this effort on the part of the European Union to slow Turkey's accession process to the EU. And that's where the greatest challenge is.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Amir Shakuri, and I'm a student at the School of General Studies. My question is actually in regards to Iran. As you said, Turkey's economy is growing, and its trade with foreign countries is an increase. Now, we know that Turkey and Iran have over $10 billion a year trade relations, and it's expected to grow over the years. Also, Washington Post reported earlier that the Turkish government is actually speaking to Washington, try to lessen the extent of sanctions against Iranian government. My question is, at what point does the danger of a nuclear Iran outweigh the benefit that Turkey gets from trade from Iran?
Of course, this is perhaps one of the questions that was continuously directed at me of the time this week that I've spent here, the question about Iran. And of course, Turkey's no vote to the sanctions at the UN Security Council has made it more relevant, perhaps, that people have asked me this question this week. Now, your question is very topical, therefore, and let me first of all say that I'd like everyone here to know that our country is against nuclear weapons. We absolutely do not want to see any nuclear weapons in our region or in a neighboring country. So we as a country do not take the nuclear weapons issue lightly. But the solution of a nuclear problem, or the solution of any problem, can be in two ways: war or diplomacy. We would like to see this problem solved through diplomacy. Because if there's war, the war is going to take place in our region. It will take place next door to us. We already know, we already have that experience. We had that experience with Iraq. In 1990, since the first Gulf War, instability in Iraq created security problems for Turkey. There was an exodus of people, mass migration to Turkey, and there was also an impact on the Turkish economy. And because of the embargo, and if you look at the embargo that was imposed on Iraq, it didn't yield any results. If we go back and look today to see what sort of an effect the embargo had, it did not punish the then Saddam regime, it punished the Iraqi people. On the one hand, the Saddam regime was punishing the Iraqi people, then the embargoes too began to punish the Iraqi people. So the people were squeezed, stuck between two difficulties. So we, frankly speaking, would not like to experience the same difficulties in the region. Therefore, we are taking initiative in way of diplomacy, and we are putting in more efforts. Because if all the negative events take place, they'll take place next to us in our region. If something like this were to happen in Latin America or some part in Asia, we perhaps would not have been as closely involved as we are in this case. We could have perhaps expressed our position from a distance. But here we're talking about our neighbor. And in the event of war, if it came, what sort of migration would take place, how our economies would be affected by it, what sort of security concerns will arise. Those are the kinds of things that we are concerned about. And therefore, we've been we have been displaying extraordinary effort, if you will, to overcome this problem through the diplomatic route. Now, as far as embargoes, the UN embargo, of course, will bind us, because the decision on sanctions were taken as binding decisions, and we abide by those sanctions, and this we already show through our reports. Now, other countries impose other sanctions beyond the sanctions of the United Nations, and that's where we find ourselves in a more difficult position. if we were to have zero trade, as is frequently expressed to us, and we feel the pressure for that, but we are also dependent on, for example, energy. We don't have gas and oil in Turkey, but we smell it from the surrounding countries. It's there, but it's not in Turkey. So we have this dependence on importing energy. 98% we import. Some of the gas we import comes from Iran. Now, if we were to go beyond the UN sanctions and were to become part of those other sanctions, then the situation that will arise will be such that we will have to pay $10 billion to Iran and for the gas that we get, but Iran is going to pay nothing back. On the one hand, we will have imports and no exports, and our foreign trade deficit will stand then at $10 billion and beyond. It could be more because gas, we have an increasing demand for gas because we have a growing economy, and we get our gas not only from Iran, we get it from Iraq, from other countries too. So these also have to be taken into consideration. Our policies must also take into consideration our national interests as well. Having said that, however, this does not mean that we take the nuclear issue lightly, because if your neighbor has nuclear weapons, I'm not saying that Iran is definitely making nuclear weapons, but this is an issue under discussion. There are concerns about this, and that's why we're having all this discussion about Iran. But what I'm saying is that if there is nuclear weapons in any neighboring country, then the greatest threat emanating from that presence would be to neighboring countries and not to continents far away. It's like two friends. If one of them has a pistol and the other one doesn't, you wouldn't feel comfortable if you're the one who doesn't have the pistol. So that's why Turkey is not a country that shows any tolerance whatsoever to the presence of nuclear weapons in its neighborhood. To go even further, as I said in the speech I made at the United Nations, the United Nations has a resolution 687 dated 1992. This is a resolution of the UN about a nuclear-free region. That's a resolution that we must follow up on. And I'm not just talking about of course, I'm not just talking about nuclear-free area. I'm also talking about the security of Israel, Arab-Israeli peace, and a nuclear-free zone. This is actually a package, a comprehensive approach, and that has to be taken up once again. And we must work on this. I made that appeal at the United Nations. So it's a very complicated question is also very broad in that sense. I tried to give you a broader answer. It's a topic that is of interest to us currently, and we are accused too because of the vote against the sanctions at the UN. But the vote at the UN has actually given us some room for a little bit of progress since then, and there were some positive developments. President Obama, in his address to the General Assembly yesterday, said that the window of diplomatic opportunity is still open. And if the window is open, and if there is perhaps slow, but some positive progress, that has been because of Turkey's efforts and it was Turkey's the way Turkey dealt with this issue with its neighbor.
President Gül, I very much appreciate your spending this time with us. I know you have to go. I want to say that it's terrific of you to come into this environment and take questions and hard questions and difficult issues. And in this heat, we try to keep the heat above 90 degrees in here so that everybody feels it. And I would just say in conclusion that we've had 7-8 years of world leaders coming through here. We know that you were once a professor, and you were the only world leader to ever not only quote Foucault, but to rely on him in your text. So you made us feel all at home. Thank you very much for coming to Columbia.
Thank you very much.